November 1945, Pingfang District, Harbin, China. The snow had already begun to fall when the last of the buildings burned. From a distance, it looked like any other fire consuming the wreckage of a defeated empire. But what burned inside those walls that night was not just wood and paper. It was evidence. Thousands of files, jars, biological samples, and records of experiments so horrifying that the men responsible believed the world must never know what had happened. They were almost right. For nearly a decade, in a remote compound spread across 6 square kilometers of frozen Manchurian earth, the Imperial Japanese Army had operated a program that had no precedent in human history. Not in its scale, not in its cruelty, and not in the complete absence of conscience that made it possible. The facility was called Unit 731. Officially, it was a water purification and disease prevention bureau. In reality, it was a human slaughterhouse disguised as a research laboratory, funded by the Japanese government, protected by the military, and commanded by a man who genuinely believed he was advancing science. That man was Shirō Ishii. Born in 1892 in a small Japanese village, Ishii was brilliant from childhood, the kind of intelligence that impresses teachers and unsettles peers. He graduated from Kyoto Imperial University School of Medicine and rose through military ranks with unusual speed. Driven by a singular obsession, biological warfare, he believed that the nation that mastered disease as a weapon would be unstoppable. He petitioned the Japanese military for years, traveling to Europe to study how Western nations had used chemical weapons in World War I, building the intellectual case for a program that would make those experiments look primitive. In 1932, he got his approval. In Manchuria, occupied Chinese territory where Japanese law did not apply and international observers could not reach, Ishii was given unlimited resources, unlimited authority, and unlimited human subjects. The prisoners brought to Unit 731 were called marutas. The word means logs. This was not accidental. By stripping human beings of their names and replacing them with a word for raw lumber, the scientists and soldiers of Unit 731 constructed a psychological architecture that made what followed possible. The marutas were Chinese civilians, Korean laborers, Russian prisoners of war, and in the later years even captured American and Allied soldiers. They arrived, not knowing what this place was. Most would never leave. What happened inside those walls across those years defies the boundaries of what the human mind wants to accept as real. Prisoners were infected with plague, cholera, typhoid, and anthrax, not through controlled clinical methods, but through direct injection, forced ingestion, and deliberate exposure, to observe how quickly the diseases progressed and how much biological material a dying human body could produce. They were subjected to frostbite experiments in temperatures of -40 degrees, their limbs repeatedly frozen and thawed to study tissue destruction, the researchers recording data while their subjects screamed. Vivisections were performed, surgeries conducted on living, conscious human beings without anesthesia, not to heal but to observe. Organs removed, studied, weighed, and discarded, while the patient remained alive on the table. Pressure chambers were used to discover at what point the human body would rupture from the inside. Subjects were spun in centrifuges until their bodies gave out. Some were buried alive to study suffocation rates. Others were deliberately starved, dehydrated, or burned to establish precise thresholds of human endurance, all recorded in meticulous scientific notation, as though the men on those tables were laboratory rats, and not fathers, sons, and brothers who had names before Unit 731 took them away. The scale of the operation was vast. At its height, Unit 731 employed over 3,000 researchers, doctors, and military personnel. The program had satellite facilities across China. Ishii's team developed ceramic bombs designed to shatter on impact and release plague-infected fleas over civilian populations. They tested these bombs on Chinese cities: the city of Ningbo in 1940, Changde in 1941. Estimates of the total death toll from both the experiments and the biological warfare attacks range from 200,000 to 500,000 human beings. These are not disputed numbers. They are the conservative estimates. And then Japan surrendered, August 1945. The order came down to destroy everything. Buildings were demolished. Animals were released or killed. The remaining prisoners, those who had somehow survived months or years of experiments, were executed so they could not testify. The researchers burned their files and dispersed across Japan, returning to civilian life as doctors, professors, and public health officials. Shirō Ishii himself disappeared into the Japanese countryside, and for a brief moment, it seemed possible that the full truth of Unit 731 would be ash and silence forever. But the Americans found out, not through heroism or investigation, through negotiation. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding the Allied occupation of Japan, learned what Unit 731 had done and made a decision that would define the moral legacy of the post-war world. The biological warfare data that Ishii's team had collected, the results of experiments on thousands of human beings, was information that the United States Army's own biological weapons program desperately wanted. Data that would have taken American researchers decades and enormous resources to produce. Data that had already been paid for in human suffering on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. MacArthur's team struck a deal. Full immunity from war crimes prosecution for Shirō Ishii and the key researchers of Unit 731, in exchange for complete transfer of all biological warfare research data to the United States. The deal was made in secret. It was kept secret for decades. While Nazi doctors were tried and hanged at Nuremberg for crimes that were similar in nature if not in scale, the men of Unit 731 walked free. Ishii spent his post-war years living quietly in Japan. He gave occasional briefings to American military researchers. He died in 1959 of throat cancer, never prosecuted, never imprisoned, never formally accused by any government of any crime. The researchers who worked under him became professors at Japanese universities. Some became respected public health officials. One became the president of a Japanese medical association. They published research, attended conferences, and lived out their natural lives in the country they had served. The snow fell on Pingfang in November 1945 and covered everything. But the ground remembers. It always does.